I've always had an interest in the second coming of Jesus. For sure, reading the gospel, his time on earth is very inspiring. But Jesus promised his disciples that he was coming again. And he was going away, but he would be back. And so that sort of leaves us hanging there, doesn't it? What is he coming back for? When is he coming back? Where will he be? How will we? A lot of questions there. When I first started delving into these things, it was a half century ago, I guess. Seems like a long time, but I remember one of the first books I read was The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. You've probably seen him. He's on videos and had a television spot for a while, I guess. Anyway, it's pretty much nonsensical, really. Shortly after that, I began reading publications of the Watchtower, and I became convinced that Jesus had returned in 1914. Although the Watchtower, again, doesn't use that expression, the return of Christ or the second coming, but they do obviously teach that Jesus began ruling in his kingdom in 1914, and that an invisible Parousia had begun in 1914. Well, that is pretty captivating. That was obviously the beginning of the last days, the final part of the days, the conclusion of the system, and all of that. But here we are now going on 110 years since then. And, well, there's some problems with that, and that's what I want to talk about. Primarily, though, there's a timing issue, but I remember Charles Taze Russell. He wrote a publication about the manner of Christ's return. And he came up with this invisible parousia. Christ was going to invisibly be present. Well, there's a problem with that. And I know I repeat myself, but some things I think bear repeating. Because Jesus said that he would be with his disciples all the days until the conclusion of the system of things. And the conclusion of the system of things begins another period of time, not nearly as long as the time from his ascension, the Christian era, until his second coming. But his second coming initiates the conclusion. And during the conclusion, something else must happen. If Jesus is with his disciples until the conclusion, is he no longer with them during the conclusion? Or is it more of the same? See, there's something not quite right with that. Well, I'd like to read Jesus' comments, his remarks to his disciples. This is right after he had instituted the evening meal, and he began speaking to them about his departure. And he said in the 14th chapter of John that he was going away to prepare a place for them. He said, in my Father's house there are many mansions, otherwise I would have told you. And if I'm going away, I will return so as to bring you home to myself, to heaven. Well, Christians for centuries have had this idea in their head, wrong idea, obviously, but that when you die, you go up or down, heaven or hell. It's got to be one or the other, right? Well, Jehovah's Witnesses at least know that when you die, you're dead. You're sleeping in death, awaiting for the resurrection, to be brought back to life. And it may not be in heaven, but billions of people will be brought back to life here on the earth. But those who do have a genuine heavenly calling also sleep in death until the return of Jesus. And Paul said he will come with the voice of an archangel and God's trumpet, and those dead in union with Christ will rise. So, but this happens when Jesus comes. So he's going away to prepare a place, and he's going to return to bring you home. And he goes on to say, this is down in verse 15, if you love me, you will observe my commandments. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever, the Spirit of the truth, which the world cannot receive because it neither sees it nor knows it. You know it because it remains with you and is in you. I will not leave you bereaved. I am coming to you. Notice that. They're not going to him. They're not going to just die and go be resurrected to heaven. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will see me no more, but you will see me, because I live and you will live. In that day, you will know that I am in union with the Father, and you are in union with me, and I in union with you. Whoever has my commandments and observes these is the one who loves me. So, Christ's coming will only be seen by those who are in union with him. He said the world will behold me no longer. It is true, though, that the apostles saw Jesus after his death. He was resurrected and he showed himself to various disciples, and over the course of 40 days, more than 500 disciples saw Jesus. But the key word is disciples. No one saw Jesus after his resurrection who did not already believe in him before his death. So that's an important point, because the people who do not have the spirit of the truth, and I'm talking about religionists, churchgoers, evangelicals, who talk about Jesus coming and we're all going to see him and yeah. No. Only those who are in union with Christ, a very small fraction of humanity. Jesus referred to them as the little flock. So, in regard to this parousia, now Jehovah's Witnesses know the meaning of this word. Translations have rendered parousia as coming, but that's an incorrect rendering, because parousia is used in a general sense, and it's always contrasting being present as opposed to being absent. Like Paul commended a congregation, he says, you were not only obedient in my presence, but also in my absence. So parousia doesn't mean coming. It's after Jesus comes, he's here, and as the Watchtower knows and has taught Jehovah's Witnesses, parousia means coming alongside. That's something, because Jesus, like I say, Jesus said, I'll be with you all the days until the conclusion. And then his parousia, he comes alongside. What does that mean? Well, it's something more than just, I'll be with you invisibly. Actually, John wrote in his first epistle that we will see him as he is when he is made manifest, and we will become like him. So, as regards this coming alongside, what is the purpose of it? Well, it's to give witness to the world. Jesus is not just going to show up and, take, like the rapture, take his chosen and then everybody else left behind, they're gone. Or even as Jehovah's Witnesses believe that God is just going to wipe out the world and the other sheep will inherit the earth and that's it. But that's not what we can expect. The reason Jehovah's Witnesses are not in tune with this is because, well, again, the Watchtower it's put everything really in the past as regards fulfillment of prophecy, particularly Revelation. It was all fulfilled in 1919. The angels blew their trumpets during the 20s, and the outpouring of God's condemnation on the world. It's all history. Yeah, except that's not true. An interesting aspect of Revelation is the 10th chapter. And I can assure you that this has not occurred. But in vision, John says, I saw another strong angel descending from heaven, arrayed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head, and his face was like the sun, and his legs were like pillars of fire. Well, calls him an angel, but if you read in the first chapter of Revelation, and John had a vision of Jesus peering into the Lord's day, he said, and his face shone as the sun, and his feet were like bronze that had been molten, come out of a furnace, and he had fiery eyes. Well, John actually saw Jesus transfigured, and his face shone like the sun, and his outer garments became glisteningly white. So Peter, who also saw that vision, later wrote that this was a foregleam of the Parousia. He said it wasn't by artfully contrived false stories that we acquainted you with the power and the presence, Parousia, of our Lord Jesus, but it was by having been eyewitnesses of his magnificence. So now in this 10th chapter, this is Christ, the angel. And he comes down, he has this little scroll in his hand, and he sets his right foot on the sea, but his left one on the earth. And he cried out with a loud voice, just as when a lion roars. Well, Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, is he not? So this is representing his establishing his dominion over the earth as king. And we haven't heard this roar yet, I can assure you. And when he cried out, the voices of the seven thunders spoke. Have you ever been out, maybe casually talking with someone, and not necessarily a storm blowing up, but a thunderclap seemingly comes out of the blue? I've had that experience, and it'll shake you up a little bit. It won't go unnoticed. You have to pay attention to what the lightning's doing. So the seven thunders spoke, and he said, when I heard the seven thunders speak, I was about to write it. So it was a message from God. But then John was told not to write it down. So it's something that we'll hear in the future. It's not contained in the Bible. It wasn't written down. Jehovah can speak, and he can deliver messages. He did when Jesus was on the earth. He said, this is my son, the beloved, listen to him. He said that on the Mount of Transfiguration, didn't he? I said a cloud overshadowed them. Yeah, so now this is interesting. So the one who came down, he says, but in the days, he said, there will be no delay any longer. But in the days when the seventh angel is about to blow his trumpet, the sacred secret that God declared as good news to his own slaves, the prophets, is indeed brought to a finish. The Christian era is over. The anointing is over. The calling and choosing is done. all those who are going to be part of the 144,000 have been chosen, and some will still be on the earth when this mystery of God is finished. The great crowd will have been gathered, right? So, what's the point? If the Watchtower claims that this happened back whenever, 1919 or something, what? And there'll be no delay any longer? I would call a century a delay. And if the finished mystery was back then, as they claim, what has been going on for this past century? God has still been calling and choosing, hasn't he? So when it's done, it's done. That's the conclusion of the system. The conclusion of the system is the conclusion of Christianity. No more preaching, no more disciple making. It'll be finished. But this angel that has come down has this little scroll in his hand. What's that all about? Well, let's read. John was told by another angel, "Go, take the open scroll that is in the hand of the angel who was standing on the sea and on the earth." And I went to the angel and told him to give me the little scroll. He said to me, "Take it and eat it up, and it will make your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will be sweet as honey." Said, so I took it and ate it, and it made my stomach bitter. And they said to me, this is the meaning of the little scroll, "You must prophesy again about peoples and nations and tongues and many kings." Well, Revelation said that the good news is finished, and now they're told to preach again. What's that all about? Well, Jehovah's Witnesses have a wrong idea. Many wrong ideas, but one of the most confounding, I think, is that the Watchtower teaches that, of course, we've been in the last days, the conclusion of the system, time of the end since 1914, and one of the features of this time of the end is that the good news will be preached during the time of the end. But in the 13th chapter of Mark, Jesus indicated that the good news would be preached first. He said to them, he says, "As for you, look out for yourselves. People will hand you over to local courts, and you will be beaten in synagogues and put on the stand before governors and kings for my sake, for a witness to them. Also, in all the nations, the good news has to be preached first." So first, before you're beaten and thrown out of the synagogue and made to stand before governors and kings. Isn't that what the little scroll was about? Prophesy again about peoples and nations, tongues, and kings. He goes on to say, "And when they are taking you to hand you over, do not be anxious beforehand about what to say. But whatever is given you in that hour, say this, for you are not the one speaking, but the Holy Spirit is." Well, that's what Jesus told his disciples in the 14th chapter of John. "I'm giving you the Spirit of the truth. It will be with you forever." So when Jesus returns, he uses them to give a witness of what? That he became king in 1914? No, that he has returned and he's walking among humanity vicariously through the chosen. They speak for him, or rather, he speaks through them because he's standing alongside them. Pretty amazing, huh? If we go back to Revelation and flip over to the 11th chapter, and this is kind of sad too, the two witnesses The Watchtower has this fable that the two witnesses came on the scene during World War I and they were killed symbolically and came back to life symbolically. And yeah. But I want to point out something interesting to you, to me anyway. He says, I will cause my two witnesses to prophesy for 1,260 days dressed in sackcloth. These are symbolized by the two olive trees and the two lampstands and are standing before the Lord of the earth. Now, if you click on the little footnote, a reference, it takes you to Zechariah 4:14. And Zechariah was asked what these lampstands and olive trees meant. And the angel explained to him, these are the two anointed ones who are standing alongside the Lord of the earth. Excuse me, the Lord of the whole earth. There's that word, alongside. Jesus said he'd come alongside his parousia. He comes alongside his chosen. But here it reverses the order. The two anointed witnesses, which really symbolize all those who were chosen during that period, 1,260 days. That's after Christianity ends. The sacred secret has come to a conclusion, and they were told to prophesy. Here the two witnesses are prophesying, and they're standing. It says before the Lord of the earth, but then Zechariah says beside, alongside the Lord of the whole earth. So when Jesus stands astride the earth and the sea and hands a scroll to his servants, to John class, I like that expression because John represents those who will be on the earth who will see Jesus when he returns, when he comes to take his bride home. Well, when Jesus handed the little scroll to John, he said it would be bitter in your belly, but sweet in your mouth. So they're able to witness that they have seen Jesus, but it means their death. Not funny, really, but Jesus died, didn't he? And many first century Christians were put to death. We know the Apostle James was killed shortly after Pentecost. Peter was put to death. John was imprisoned on Patmos, probably died there. That's interesting. The three men who saw Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration were prisoners and martyrs. So when it talks about these two witnesses being put to death, it's not a symbolic death. It says, when they have finished their witnessing, they're witnessing about Jesus being present, the wild beast that ascends out of the abyss will wage war with them and conquer them and kill them. And their corpses will be on the main street of the great city that is in a spiritual sense called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was also executed on the stake. Wow. It goes on to say, after 3.5 days, the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood on their feet, and a great fear fell upon those who saw them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven say, come up here. And they went up into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies saw them. Well, that's very highly symbolic. Paul explained that those who are living, and when the parousia begins, will not sleep in death, not even for 3 days, not even for an hour or a minute, or even a nanosecond. Right? Paul said, in the blink of an eye, the twinkling of an eye, they're changed from human to spirit. But by referring to 3.5 days, the Spirit of life comes into them. It's hearkening Jesus being in the tomb for parts of 3 days. And his resurrection is the source of their life. Isn't that what Jesus said to his disciples again in the 14th chapter of John, in his sort of his farewell speech to them? He says, because I live and you will live. And Jesus is not talking about life living as a human. He's talking about immortal life, incorruptible life, never dying, never needing any spirit from God to continue living, having life in themselves. So that's what's represented here. And then this voice, obviously, come up here, symbolizes their resurrection. They went up into heaven in a cloud. Well, who else did that? Jesus. He ascended physically up to a point beyond the clouds to demonstrate to his disciples with little faith and understanding that he was indeed going to heaven. And of course, he didn't take the body beyond the clouds. He became a spirit. But anyway, those seven thunders makes you wonder. Presently, I might be the only person on planet Earth who realizes this. And that's okay. It gets kind of lonely, but, I expect there to be a wake-up call. That's what the thunders are, right? Because at present, Jehovah's Witnesses are under this idea that the Watchtower is going to lead them into the new world. So you have to follow the slave, and they're going to issue life-saving instructions. So we have to, stay connected to this. And, well, that's not going to happen. Because, this whole issue between Jehovah and Satan, we have to actually have faith. And following a human is kind of easy, and the Watchtower's made it very easy. Just go to your meetings and answer at the meeting from the paragraph and on. There's a whole program laid out. And it works. It's kept everybody out of trouble, I suppose, for the most part. But this idea that Jesus came in 1914 is a deception. So when Christ comes, that will be a thunderous event because nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, food shortages, earthquakes in one place after the other, and food shortages, on. And then a great tribulation that will shake this system to its core. That's your seven thunders. And the Watchtower will be totally discredited. How could you have been so blind? Well, that's what Jehovah asked. Who is as blind as my servant? Who is as deaf as the messenger whom I send? Well, Jehovah could have awakened them. He could have enlightened them. Jesus could have enlightened his apostles. He told them over and over he was going up to Jerusalem. He was going to be betrayed. The older men were going to put him to death, and the apostles couldn't see through it, even though they believed he was the Son of God. And Jesus told them, God revealed that to you. Well, why didn't God reveal to them that Jesus is going to die and be taken? They just couldn't. Well, they had to prove their faith. The truth will lead you so far, and then you have to act on faith. So a lot of things are going to get blown up in the near future. I expect Israel, the whole evangelical movement is based, their claim to, legitimacy. They claim that Israel is God's nation, and it became so in 1948, preparing for Jesus' return. Well, what happens if it gets obliterated in the first phase of World War III? God wouldn't let that happen. Well, that sounds like Jehovah's Witnesses. God would never allow the governing body to go apostate. God would never destroy the watchtower. Well, think again. It's going to happen. And that's really good, because that means that Christ is here, and we can go that next few steps on faith, and then the door opens up to a whole new world, literally. Well, that's my Sunday talk. Thanks for watching.